the Museum of Chinese in America. Welcome to our home and to our program. We're delighted that you're able to join us in this forum on Ann Lee's new book, What the U.S. Can Learn from China. With a title like this, we look forward to a very provocative discussion. For those of you new to the museum, Ann Lee and this evening's program are both typical as well as unique for us. Typical because throughout the year we feature stimulating topics through the lens of Chinese Americans who have important and nuanced perspectives on world events and social issues. Just because our background is a hybrid cultural background. Our audiences are smart, they're engaged, and they're fun like you, and they're almost as good looking as well. So I would not be doing my job if I didn't encourage you to join as members so you can be part of our family, and we've put out brochures on your seats. With membership, you can invite a guest to join us at our exhibits, and most importantly, you can be supporting our many educational programs for students of all ages. Every year, we bring about 9,000 students K through 12 through our exhibits, and we have about 550 tours for them. We have walking tours, we have neighborhood tours, we also have special exhibitions, and you're welcome tonight to see them afterwards. And how is this evening unique? Well, how can I describe Ann Lee? She has both the sharpness of someone who has been an investment banker and a hedge fund partner, as well as the depth and thoughtfulness of a scholar. Ann has been a frequent media commentator on economic issues and appeared on Bloomberg, ABC, CBS, CNN, and NPR with op-eds in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, Forbes, and many others. Ann is a professor of economics and finance at NYU and a former visiting professor at Beida. She also acted as an economic advisor to Chinese economic officials, as well as to several large Chinese asset management firms. She was educated at UC Berkeley, Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of International Affairs, and Harvard Business School. Ann is currently a senior fellow at DEMAS, a multi-issue national organization that combines research, policy development, and advocacy to influence public debate and catalyze change. And we are expecting a very interesting public debate tonight. So I now welcome Ann to speak, but also invite you to join us after this program in the museum lobby upstairs, where she will be signing books. Ann.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I really want to thank MOCA for organizing this event. They've done a terrific job communicating and spreading the word. So I want to thank them for that. And thank you all for showing up tonight. I'm really pleased with the turnout. I really didn't expect so many people here, especially since I know that sex, money, and violence are what sells. And unfortunately, my book is missing all three. I was actually, pardon? I was actually thinking the other day that if my publisher wanted to sell more books, maybe they should have put a more misleading photo on the front cover, like maybe Michelle Yeoh seducing James Bond or something. That, or maybe that action shot of Wendy Deng, protecting Rupert from the pie thrower. Like that probably would have caught some attention too. But what do I know? So anyway, I often get asked, why did I write this book? And it's a particularly interesting question because for the folks who know me, I had spent about a decade on Wall Street as a bond trader and as a derivatives trader, and I didn't really do much writing during that period. In fact, it was funny that one guy that dated me, he said, "Anne, you're the only woman that responds to my emails with one-word sentences." It was either yes, no, or maybe. And so it actually, obviously, took a lot of motivation to go from one-word sentences to an 80,000-word manuscript. And what really motivated me was that I was really worried about the direction that this country was headed. This really started back in 2005 when I was working for a very large hedge fund, and I was trading the structured products that most of you know are called toxic waste that caused the 2008 financial crisis. And it was very disturbing to me during that period because I had seen so many of these deals come through that really seemed irregular. And what confirmed my suspicions were that I would occasionally go to some of these broker events where I would overhear some of these investment bankers comment on how they were able to underwrite $1 billion deal and secure it with only baseball cards. In other words, they were bragging about the fact that they were complete scams, that they were able to sell these things around the world. And so this was very disturbing to me, and I had tried to alert authorities about these problems in the market, but when it was apparent to me that they weren't going to take any action, I decided to leave Wall Street at that point because I realized that finance there had turned into something that wasn't what I originally thought I signed up for, and that it was becoming increasingly risky and an increasingly corrupt market. And so that was how I began my journey into policy reform. I then went into academia and started writing about issues with the banking sector and other areas of governance. And so when a lot of the policy journals and other authorities were basically dismissing my writing, it was not a surprise to me that in 2008 we had the financial crisis. It was really a sad moment when I saw Hank Paulson on television asking US taxpayers for $700 billion to bail out his cronies when they had just already reaped trillions of dollars of profits from people around the world. And so this was highly upsetting to me. And then when President Obama came to office and had Tim Geithner and Larry Summers as part of his economic team, and these were the very people that had Wall Street in their back pocket, I really had started becoming very despondent about the whole situation. But it was not Obama that really gave me hope. What gave me hope was China. Because if we step back and think about it, it was only 30 years ago that China was considered a backwater country. They basically had been written off as a lost cause. And even though thousands of years it was considered a world empire, 200 years ago it was basically a fallen semi-colonial state that was overtaken by Western powers. And it had fallen so far that people like Deng Xiaoping and others who were scholars that went overseas experienced firsthand deep prejudice. And it really saddened and ashamed them that this was what had happened to China, and they knew that they weren't getting respect because China was so weak. And this gave them the desire to make China strong again. And they took this kernel of an idea that was really held by just a handful of people, and they managed to turn it into this overwhelming movement that allowed the Communist Party to take over the country in about 20 years. Unfortunately, when they did come to power, they did not make China strong immediately. In fact, they did the complete opposite. They had an ideology that was noble in its effect, but it was not married with some realism that incorporated human nature in its considerations. And so their policies ended up causing massive starvation that killed more people in China than people that died in World War II. However, at least these leaders never gave up their cause. They never gave up their dream to make China strong. So they kept an open mind. And when Deng Xiaoping was able to take power after Mao, he was open to ideas that were radically departing from their ideology. And it was this acceptance and this openness to experimentation that allowed them to come up with a whole set of ideas that enabled to come together and make China go on the right path and develop the dynamism and the strength that they have been able to become the second largest economy today. And so it is these ideas that that help propel China on this correct path to economic growth and prosperity for more people that I discussed in my book. And I wrote this book believing that this was applicable to other nations around the world, including democratic capitalist nations like the US, albeit you would have to modify some of these ideas, but I discuss how they can be modified. And I know that a lot of people are incredulous when they hear this because they immediately think, how can we learn from a nation that's had so many issues with human rights and trade issues? And my answer to that is that, yes, nobody is perfect. We've heard about all of China's weaknesses and a lot of the worst things about China from the media here and from various politicians. What we don't hear enough about are the strengths. And we could be missing a tremendous opportunity to learn from them as they've learned from us over the years. And learning can be a two-way street. Granted, the US is a very strong country and has a lot going for it, but we're not a perfect nation. And we got strong because we were incorporating ideas from around the world. And it's time again to learn from others, from China and as well as many other nations. And given that this is a presidential election year, we have a very historic opportunity to do so, especially when we have so many problems that are just so intractable. If we can learn these lessons, we may be able to deal with them with that insight and hopefully even help advance civilization overall. So I cover a lot of ideas here, and I know I won't have time to cover all the ideas, so I encourage you to buy the book later. But I will cover a few major themes that are particularly relevant to a presidential election year. The first one I want to discuss is the idea of meritocracy in government, in democracy. And this is the idea of leadership selection, because right now the US is in a crisis of leadership. Politicians have been hitting historical lows in terms of approval ratings from the citizens here repeatedly. Poll after poll shows that they're under 20%. 60 Minutes actually even reported that Congress has an approval rating of only 9% now. Coupled with the idea that, Occupy Wall Street spread like wildfire, this is very disconcerting And we really need to address this problem, because if it doesn't get addressed quickly, and we don't have a government that is seen as legitimate, this can easily deteriorate into something closer to fascism. And I'm not exaggerating, because when governments feel threatened, the people in power will start to resort to drastic actions in order to maintain the status quo and keep themselves in power. And we're already starting to see signs of this, right? Because Barack Obama signed a bill into law on New Year's Eve, basically saying that the military can now detain American citizens indefinitely without trial or without evidence. This kind of incursion into civil rights is very scary. And so we really need to figure out a way to get the right people in place to lead this nation. Now, it seems counterintuitive that I would suggest following China's model, because most people think China as a dictatorship. But I want to clarify that many folks outside the US actually see China's leadership as the best technocrats in the world. And even within China, Pew Research Center has been conducting polls for years now, where they report that the citizens report over 80% approval rating of their top leaders, of their government. So how did they get this level of legitimacy with their citizens? So the Chinese actually have this notion that the honor to run a government and run a country should only belong to those who have earned the authority to do so. This idea of earned authority is prevalent throughout their system. And so let me explain. If I had to use an analogy, it would be like a corporation. Nobody elects a CEO from a popularity contest. No, the CEO basically earns his way to the top positions through many years of rotating in different positions and demonstrating that he can do the job well, and he is smart and capable, and people then know that he has the ability to lead. So similarly, in the Chinese government, in order to join the central government, people have to first pass a competency test, and they have to do this by the time they're 35. And it's a very difficult one. They have a pass rate of under 20%, I understand. So they first select for very bright people to be in there. Then you work your way to the top in different positions for 5-year terms, and you can only serve the position for no more than 2 terms. And at the end of 5 years, you always get evaluated in a 360-degree evaluation, where superiors and people who report to you can say, you know, how well you did, and you have to produce tangible results to show how you've improved the situation before you got there. So for instance, if you were appointed to be a university president, you would then have to show how you increased the number of graduates that got great jobs, paying jobs after they graduated, or that you increased the number of foreign exchange programs with top schools around the world. So tangible things like that, that they need to show that they've accomplished during that time. And if they basically have an approval rating that is positive, then they can be promoted to, say, a mayor of another city or some other position. But if they didn't do well, then they would get demoted and their compensation would also go down. So this would happen throughout their career for decades. So by the time someone is eligible to be eligible for the Politburo or the standing committee at the very top levels, they will already have had a tremendously long track record of showing how they've improved the country. And that is how the citizens really have faith in the top leaders to do a good job. So how do we use this idea in the US context? Because obviously I'm not promoting the idea that someone go through the ranks of government here before they can be considered to be the President of the United States, but there are certain principles that could be used here that would make sense. First of all, the idea of the revolving door. That is a serious problem in our country, where people from the private sector go to the public sector and then rotate back into the private sector for higher pay, for all sorts of things in exchange for preferences while they had influence in government. And that is a breeding ground for a lot of corruption. If we had stricter controls over the revolving door, that could be very beneficial to our government system. And maybe we just extend the number of years that someone can, that they have to stay away from the sector that they had been involved with, or some other restriction. But we need to figure out a way to set higher standards for vetting the people who take high office and have tremendous power. Another idea is the competency test, right? This is not a crazy idea in that we already give out foreign service exams for people who are going to be ambassadors of this country. And many other professions also pass out exams, right? Doctors have to pass medical boards, lawyers have bar exams, there are licensing exams for architects. So the idea that these other professions want qualified people, why doesn't it translate to the US? Today in the US, we have something called the Plum Book, in which whoever gets the high office, they have a bunch of positions, high-level positions that they can assign to whoever. And generally, these positions go to people who were their highest donors, not necessarily the people who are the most qualified. For instance, Michael Brown, who was the head of FEMA during Hurricane Katrina, didn't have any experience in emergency management when Hurricane Katrina hit. And we saw the results of that. It was absolutely embarrassing for the world to see how we couldn't help the citizens after days of living in a complete disaster area. So the idea of having competency exams probably makes sense for anyone, whether it's politicians or policymakers who are trying to take these levels of responsibility. And finally, the idea of track records. Now, I know that it's really hard to measure track record, but I think that if we can require that people demonstrate at least, say, 2 decades worth of management experience of leading an organization and creating positive change somehow, that could be a requirement for someone who's seeking a higher office. So these are ideas that I have proposed. There are many other ideas, but this is a topic that I think needs more discussion in today's debates about leadership. And so with that, I'll actually move on to the second theme, which is the idea of long-term planning. Today, I think that we have a nation that suffers from a disease which I call short-termism, because we tend to only react to emergencies or to just short-term gains. So companies often try to just get short-term profits to manage to Wall Street expectations, or politicians think in terms of 2-year election cycles. And so there's not a lot of long-range thinking, and I propose that maybe we look at the Chinese as a way to step back and think about the long-term potential of our nation and where we want to be in 50 years' time. So the Chinese have used the idea of 5-year plans to balance their temptation for short-term results. And it's very much like a strategic plan. that a corporation would have. In that, basically, it's a goal-setting exercise that they take very seriously. So much like the way a CEO would have a strategic plan and require that different departments deliver different results in response to whatever budget they received, the Chinese basically have similar things. So the 5-year plan lays out for their entire economy what sort of achievements and goals that they will have attained in 5 years' time. So for example, the Chinese really want to have a greener economy. So in the latest 12th 5-year plan, it's called the 12th 5-year plan, from 2010 to 2015. They want to reduce carbon emissions by 20% per unit of GDP. They want to increase energy efficiency. So they have these specific targets attached to them, and then they give the autonomy to the people who are in charge of these areas, ways to come up with the solutions to reach those targets. So then there'll be people in charge of investments in alternative energy. There'll be people that are overlooking building codes to make sure buildings become more energy efficient. Others will be trying to invite more foreign direct investment, say in hybrid vehicles. So they have a whole set of things that just roll down to the actual micro level, but it starts at the top with a vision. In contrast, the US basically has a federal budgeting system where we just allocate money and don't have any performance targets attached to it, right? So our system today, we have the OMB comes up with a budget, and most of these departments aren't accountable to any results per se. So what we have then is just taxpayer money going into a black hole, and we don't know what really happens with this money, and we end up having tremendous waste. Our healthcare system is one very glaring example of it. We spend more money on healthcare than any other nation, especially even the developed nations with socialized healthcare, and we can't show anything for it. We don't have longer life expectancy. We don't save more lives. We actually have more problems in that, and so it's because we don't have enough performance targets and holding people accountable. So if we had a 5-year plan equivalent, we might introduce more transparency and more accountability to these departments. And the Chinese also have other things called tenure plans, and they're less well known, but they are actually just as powerful as the 5-year plans. So they have specific tenure plans for specific things. So like right now, they're trying to develop their talent base. So they know that the US strength is our ability to attract immigrants from around the world. They want to do the same thing. And so they've basically set up a tenure plan to attract the best minds in the world to come to China to work. And they have set specific targets to it, and they create the incentive systems to do that, where they would go around hiring people, paying for their room, board, have very competitive compensation, give them a lot of responsibility and autonomy to do certain things. And these are all for areas where there would be creativity and intellectual work involved. And this is a very interesting talent industrial policy that is frankly missing in the United States. And so I talk about this idea and many others in the book of what we can really adopt and learn from China here to make ourselves more competitive. The final theme that I think I'll talk about is the idea of special economic zones. One thing that absolutely drives me crazy with these debates that go on, whether it's the presidential candidates or talking heads on TV, is that they would debate, ad nauseum about whether one policy is better than the other, and they never really have any results to show for it. so it just becomes a debate of ideology. And really, it's not about more government or less government. It's how you develop government. How effective do you make government that really counts? It needs to be a more nuanced debate, and it has to be based on something concrete. So what the Chinese have done is that they have adopted this idea called statistical experimental design, which is used mostly in scientific areas and in product designs. And a lot of our corporations use this. Basically, people test out an idea and they fine-tune it before they roll it out to stores to sell to the public, or scientists basically test out their hypotheses, right, in lab experiments. We don't really do that in economics, especially macroeconomics today. And so what the Chinese have done is that they will test out various policies in different areas, sometimes in provinces, sometimes just in cities. But what they do is they test it out in different areas to see if the policy has the intended effect, whether that it works or has unintended consequences. They will basically decide with objective observers, and then they'll go and fine-tune these things to make sure they do work before they roll it out to the whole nation. And this is basically what they did in the 80s with Shenzhen and Guangdong, and these areas. They tested out various capitalist methods that enabled these special economic zones then to really thrive, much more so than the rest of the country. And so this was their way of experimenting different ideas, and once it worked, they let it roll out to more and more areas. And so this is a very smart way that we could also adopt in the United States. We have 50 states here that used to be called 50 Laboratories of Democracy. Most of my law friends tell me this. So what I'm suggesting is that we can take these 50 states and also turn them into 50 laboratories of economic opportunity. The federal government can work very closely with each of these states to help design these programs and test them out and see if they work. So one example could be the idea of testing out the state-owned bank, right? Because North Dakota is the only state today with a state-owned bank. And North Dakota happens to be the one state in the nation that didn't ask for a bailout from the federal government during this economic downturn. They have been around for about 100 years. They have always been profitable. None of their officers receive any bonuses. And their state has been thriving economically for a very long time. They're probably the only place where housing prices have been going up. And so even though some people may say, oh, it's because they have energy as commodities to boost the economy. Well, there are many other areas that can thrive. Obviously, Silicon Valley in California has a very strong tech focus that can generate a lot of wealth. There are farm areas that produce produce that can obviously be very productive as well. And so the idea that it's just commodity driven I don't really buy that. What we need to do is test this idea out and see if it works. And so we could actually take this model, try out a state-owned bank in other states to see if it has the same effect, and figure out and tease out why one works or why another one doesn't work. But if it consistently works in every state, then maybe we have a competitive model to the model we have today. So just to wrap up, I really want to suggest that this book has a whole portfolio of ideas. But I think the overriding theme is that Americans need to keep an open mind, really need to remember that sometimes prejudice and other biases color our ways of seeing the world, and that could really hurt us when we're trying to find the right solutions. And so this book hopes to elevate the conversation and dialogue about what needs to happen and how do we make a stronger nation. So I hope that instead of people debating who's going to beat Obama, it should be about who's going to make the nation strong. So I'll close there, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
In your book, you mentioned Spain and their empire from a couple of years ago, which is very similar to America today, as far as having a major Achilles heel and a potential for disaster. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I basically say that, America is kind of an empire, like previous empires. We have a military that stretches the whole world with, hundreds of military bases. And like other empires, we've gone into multiple wars like they have. And this can be harmful in the long run. One, because you divert a lot of resources to an area that could be going into more productive areas. And two, you're really creating ill will around the world when you, resort to military solutions as opposed to diplomatic ones. And so I had mentioned in Spain that they eventually fell because a lot of their previous colonial outposts had risen up and fought against them. Spain also was deficit spending and had approached inflationary problems. They had also basically outsourced all their manufacturing in other areas, and basically probably just became too complacent about their situation. So yes, I basically say that even though it's hard for us to imagine how we could be just like Spain, where we've got all this technology and we're innovative and blah, 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 but these things happen over time. And if we're not careful, I basically say that, we could be, it could be death of 1,000 cuts. And so I basically am saying that instead of waiting for the moment when it's too late, let's start thinking about these things now.
Sorry, actually, I just want to play a little bit about devil's advocate here. I spent about 23 years in China before I came to the United States. So I kind of feel a lot of idea about China is a little bit idealized. So I think, say, just a simple exam about like the competency test for China's government official. So again, I think it's a great idea for government officials to kind of have some competence tests like other industries. But the reality is that given that government work in different areas like budgeting, economic development, emergency management, it's pretty much very difficult to have one competency test that covers to make sure that the government official is up to the task. And the reality about the China's government test, competence test, you pretty much spend 50% of your time preparing in that exam to say why the Communist Party is one of the best to manage the country. And then you can spend 80% of your time spending 10 months in a year to prepare for them, but still, I guess, 80% of the graduate would rather take the exam. Why? It's a simple reason. If you work for the government, you never get laid off. Here in the United States, if you have a budget issue, even a government official would be laid off. And then that's put them in the same level of every people working in the private, but that would never happen in China. So that's why I would say, in a lot of idea, in theory, it sounds very good, but that's pretty much probably not happening in China in reality. So that's some of my 2 cents to share with the group.
Thank you for your comments. Yes.
To take another comparative political approach, France has not a testing system, well, a testing education system with the Grand École, which in order to get in is a rigorous testing system. They have free education. I'm a board member of the Grand École here in New York, but great schools, except for if you have a testing system where the elites serve the elites, a lot of times is one of the problems in French companies is that you'll have someone parachutes in from management that was a government employee because they passed the test. So the Grand Depot promotes people in the Grand Depot. So if you are a fantastic person, didn't pass the test at 18, moved up to mid-level management of the company, you get very irritated at the fact that a new SVP comes in who used to hold a bureaucratic position in the government, and it just doesn't work out in a competitive model entirely. So how do you respond to something like that? In the U.S., I mean, how would you envision tests in the United States? I could see, you have your Series 6 license on trade or other tests.
Yeah, well, I'm basically saying that this is a way to improve the current system, right? Because the current system in the U.S., those top positions aren't available to our civil servants anyway that have worked up, just like in that case, worked up through the system, and then they can't get that top position of that agency or whatever it is because it's a plum book position that a president gets to appoint. And that whole saying, to the victor go the spoils, still really applies today in that sense. And when they appoint someone there, that person doesn't have to have any competency. So I'm suggesting make those people pass a competency before they get that position. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that this is the perfect system, but it could be an improvement from the one that we already have. Yes?
Just not to belabor the issue, but let's say the plum positions are something that are appointed. Wouldn't the electorate in an informed democracy be capable of judging whether those are qualified appointments and also throw the elected official out if the elected official insists on appointing idiots over and over again into incompetent positions? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
There are hundreds of these positions, and they're not open for the electorate to really follow. I mean, I detail in my book all over the place that people, everyday people, are too busy to be following, who did Obama appoint to all these different positions, right? They're too busy making a living and caring for their kids and all these other things. And so a lot of these things happen. Pardon?
There are watchdog groups who we do depend to watch out for these.
That's true, but sometimes, when there's no mechanism to say that this is wrong, this happens all the time where they get appointed to these positions. And a lot of them don't require Senate confirmation because they're deemed not senior enough, right? So basically a president can not appoint the undersecretary of something, just appoint the deputy secretary, and that would escape any vetting whatsoever and let that person run the whole show. So there's no way for people to know, what's really going on in that case and have a real say in that.
But that fundamentally misses the point of having an informed democracy, selecting an elected official. You're assuming, your thesis appears to be, in every one of your points, it assumes that the centralized government makes a proper decision up and down the line at every single point. In a democracy, you have the electorate every now and then deciding, we've had enough of this incompetence, we're going to throw out and try another one. Now, that might not be a perfect system, but it would be a system where, for instance, as you pointed out when you started your lecture, you go down a route and you kill 30 million of your own people because you had a great idea and you thought it would work, and it turned out to be a really bad idea.
Oh, I'm not suggesting we get rid of democracy at all.
No,
I
I'm
said
not
this is how we
suggesting wrong.
adopt
I'm not suggesting
something to a democratic system to make our system better.
But we have civil service examinations. We have oversight by the free media and the electorate to choose whether the appointments are appropriate or not, and hold the elected officials accountable every election that they come up for, re-election.
Well, I think there's plenty of, that's plenty written about, what is wrong with our democracy today, right? Because it's really not about just one person, one vote. It has become more $1, one vote. And so, it's not as simple, and democracy is not working the way you're idealizing it to be.
I haven't idealized that at all, but on the other side, to look at the Chinese system, you would be assuming there's any transparency in how the Communist Party works in appointments. I mean, that surely must be more idealized.
I'm not suggesting that their system is perfect. I actually said that we would just borrow certain ideas and figure out how to modify it for ours. I never said that we do exactly what they do. I never said that in my book. Yes?
Have a question on writing. Is this your first book, and how long it take you to finish the book? And also, I'm curious. You used to be a banker. Kind of, how you shift on this direction, and also can you share some, insight about the writing and research process on this U.S.-China issue?
Sure. I actually wrote this book in about a month.
Really? My goodness.
But I'd spent many years researching this. So as soon as I left Wall Street, I had pretty much started gathering a lot of information. And even there was a chapter in there talking about Wall Street excesses, and that was obviously from my background on Wall Street. But as far as China is concerned, I had spent 2008 as a visiting professor at Beida, and I was teaching a graduate course in their CCR department. For those who have never heard of it, it stands for China Center for Economic Research, that Justin Lin started, who's the chief
Justin
economist.
Lin.
Yeah, he's the chief economist at the World Bank now. And but I had actually gone back and forth to China many times before that, starting in 1985, and I talk about this in the preface, that my mother discovered that her real family was still there and her mother was still alive. And that was when we went back to go find them. And since then, I had many personal and business trips to China before the appointment at Beida. Yes?
And, we heard from one person as far as the weakness of the Chinese system. As far as, I'd like to know your perspective as far as what do you see with the programs in China that is their weakness, and how would you improve it? And do you go in that in your book as far as like what they're doing wrong, learn from what they're doing right, but also what do you see that they're doing wrong?
Yeah, I basically say in my book, I can't cover everything about these two civilizations. That would probably take about 3 million words, not 80,000. So the focus of this book is actually what they're doing right and how we can learn from them. Clearly, they do a lot of things wrong, and we've heard about their human rights issues and so forth. And I definitely feel that they need to keep reforming those areas too. Otherwise, they'll never be a strong nation. And so what they're doing is that they realize what their weaknesses are. They're trying to develop a stronger legal system. But just to give you an example, we have about 1 lawyer to every 200 people in the United States. They have about 1 to every 12,000. So the number of lawyers there to protect citizen rights and so forth is just so far fewer than what we have, which is why there's so much corruption and other issues that go on in China. But realize they haven't really opened up until just 30 years ago, and we've had hundreds of years of this, right? So this is a matter of, I guess, growing pains for them. But as far as my observations while I was there, I mean, when I was a professor at Peking University, I was invited to a lot of meetings with the government officials as well as with professors from around the world. I stayed at this guest house where I got to basically dine with any professor I wanted that was there, and often I met with people from Greece, from Iran, from wherever you can think of. They had professors doing research and teaching there, and so it made for a very dynamic and very lively conversation about all kinds of topics. And I would say that when I was talking to the government officials about what was going on with the economic crisis and basically giving them advice on what to do in response, because quite frankly they didn't understand why Bear Stearns suddenly collapsed. and all these other crazy things that were going on, and so I had to basically explain to them. And so I think that their willingness to have an economic dialogue with me was far more open than the attitude that I received from American regulators here, frankly. And so that's basically, what I came away with, realizing that, they may not be perfect, and I know they're not perfect, but at least they are trying to improve themselves. And I think that's the attitude that we need to cultivate in this country.
How do we cultivate that? As an American, I definitely want a more competent government, because if there's a lot of choices, that means choices out there. So, what is your opinion on what would be the first step for Americans in demanding a more competent government?
So, in my opening chapter, I talk about culture, actually, because even though we can talk about economics and other policies at ad nauseum, culture does also play a role, right? Because what you value and what you want to spend your time on and what you want to spend your money on also matters to an economy. And so in that chapter, I actually talk about the idea that maybe we need to encourage our media, which have tremendous power over our thoughts and what we buy and what we think is cool, to perhaps give them incentives to put out programs that would encourage and foster more of an attitude of openness. For instance, many of the things that I had published or even shows I've been on only get aired outside of this country. So something that I would say on CNN would be shown on CNN International, but people watching CNN here won't see it. And that's true of Newsweek. So Newsweek published an article of mine in their newsprint, but it only got printed in the Newsweek International version that the whole world got to see except Americans. So basically, I'm basically saying that this is something that Americans need to be aware of and should actually ask their representatives to change this. Yes?
You mentioned earlier the importance of a strategic plan for in politics. But it's
I'm sorry, strategic plan for what?
in politics?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like an overarching
Right.
plan. But if you're looking at a system like democracy where it moves in like 2-3 year cycles, and the politicians are mainly motivated to stay in power because if they lose it, they get such a hit in their own utility, right? So how would you recommend that we give them incentive to follow kind of a long-term plan instead of taking a hit to satisfy their short-term demands of their constituents?
I mean, it's a tricky and, I don't have all the answers to how we design something like that and how we redesign it maybe, but a lot of what gets done in Washington actually are not done by politicians. In fact, most of the bills are written by bureaucrats that have long tenure in Washington. They're not elected. They basically assist politicians there to write the bills and to work with lobbyists to craft the language and so forth. Perhaps there's a way to require that these bureaucrats have the responsibility to carry out certain things and that it wouldn't be just falling on the politicians. But like I said, this is a very tough nut to crack. And so maybe what we need to do is, try it out in the state and see what would happen and figure out how we can modify that system. Yes?
Do you have any notions about like what Neil Ferguson sort of believes, that the United States really can't grow at a strong pace, that historically we outstrip the whole world? Because in a sense, we have maxed out our consumer credit. We just have too much debt. We don't have that excess capital, whereas China is just beginning to embark on that journey, and they have unlimited consumer credit, so to speak, so that it's just that the things that made the West, he wrote a book, The West and the Rest, the things that made the West far exceed the old world now seems to be running out. As an economist, have any notions
I
on that?
really don't agree with him.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why, because all these institutions are man-made. We decide the rules of what has to happen and what doesn't. There's no rule book that says that we can't have some debt forgiveness, or there's no rule book that says, okay, we're gonna ask the top 0.01% of the people and tax them 90%, and that this money will go into some fund that provides equity to entrepreneurs. Because today we have so many entrepreneurs with great ideas, so many people with small businesses that can't get funding at all. And it's not because they don't have the talent or the great ideas, it's because there's just no access to it. And so we don't have a very good system for allocating capital right now. And what we need to do is come up with a mechanism to do that. And so there's no reason why we can't have a resurgent economy. It's the old rules we're stuck with right now that is causing this stagnation. Yes?
I think I agree with, I believe the subject matter of the book is very, very valuable. But the way that I know the average American citizen is that, and you can see this in our popular media today when John Huntsman spoke in Chinese, Michael Steele said, "Oh, I thought he was giving a takeout order or something like that." I mean, I could see the average American citizen looking at the title of your book, and their spine would straighten. So I would like to, your book came out recently. Have you found that to be proven or disproven?
Yeah, no, I get all kinds of reactions from my book. I mean, some people would say, "Oh, what the U.S. can learn from China, how to copy and cheat." I mean, I get that a lot. I get, other positive reactions are, yeah, it's about time, so I get the whole range.
I think you have 4 out of 5 stars rating on Amazon.
Yes.
My question is, since you teach in both countries, so based on your own experience, what's the difference between American education and Chinese education? Another question is, what's different? You teach both students in both countries, so what's the difference between American students and Chinese students?
Well, I would say that the Chinese students are probably more prepared for their level of education. They happen to have a very broad understanding of a lot of things in politics and history and math and sciences. I would say that a lot of the students entering into American universities are very ill-equipped. I have a friend who is an English teacher for the new school, and she was begging me to get her a job over in China because she said, "Anne, I am so tired of babysitting my freshman class because they can't write a sentence."
They don't do the homework either. Okay, just I could try to squeeze in my own what I feel about the China growth. I read an article from newspaper talk about one Harvard graduate, it's an American who works in American company in China. He tried to do the survey or investigation. I think he went to kindergarten someplace in Shanghai to check them how they good with math with all these small kids. Then and he pretty much lost the kids beat him. I know the Chinese educational system, they focus maybe too much on the math side. I'm not sure about the other science subjects, but they serious about mathematics. I know that. But he wrote an article in the internet for New York Times. He said, the Western country have to understand that the Chinese, they make the economic successful. It's not because of the communist system, nothing to do with that. Because the culture, Chinese culture, they value the education and hard working. Basically, I feel at least part of it makes sense. Chinese as a country, they have the culture rooted in this area. They worship education and hard work. So I think the country, they grew up so quickly in economics. It is their citizen. It is to work hard. They're willing to work hard. They have motivation. It's not somebody force you. So that's what I feel.
No, I agree that there is a very strong work ethic and there is a high desire to do well. But I think the idea that parents want their kids to do better than them is actually pretty universal. It's just that here in the United States, a lot of the students, the young people get the message that the way to success is not through education, but through just networking, some luck, because they see how people become rich and famous being on Jersey Shore, for instance. Right? This is a show where, these people have very kind of controversial behavior. They swear, they fight, and these people are getting paid millions. And so I think the wrong message is being sent to the young people in the United States. And so I think the media plays a big role in that. And I'm suggesting that there are ways to try to change that culture, right? So one of the producers had approached me once. They were at Fox, and they said, "Ann, can you come take the other side of this debate?" And the topic was Paris Hilton is the best American or a great American hero because she is a great consumer and consumerism is good. Like that was the debate topic. And so, I just basically passed on that, but that kind of tells you.
I think what I feel that between the two countries is certain things that you probably never can change. It might something related to democracy or not, but I think that the country have their own characteristics. Nothing to do with the politics or political system, capitalism or communism, such as the parents teach the children in Chinese way. They force them. Sometimes they might physically punish them. I'm not trying to encourage those unhealthy ways, but it is make the kids doing better performances. At least in academic areas. That's what I feel.
Yes, back there.
Yeah, I briefly glanced through your book and you talk about, there's a chapter about soft power. And the way you describe it is the way it's happening, from China with African countries, South America is basically an exchange of energy resources against, let's say, highways and infrastructure. Hu Jintao has said that China's soft power was a bit weak, and he was trying to remedy that. My point is that I always thought, obviously, Chinese soft power is not going to happen through movies or songs or those things that we think of as soft power in the U.S., right? And I always thought that maybe the language, Chinese language, can be the other Great Wall.
Chinese food is good.
Wait, so your question again is?
My question is, how is it gonna happen in terms of like, you know, the cultural exports of the US, you know, really happens a lot through, you know, movies.
Institutes around the world to help teach Mandarin to people who want to learn it. I think it's really a matter of if you apply yourself, because I think anyone is capable of learning whatever they want to learn, as long as they have the desire to do it. And certainly it can be difficult, but it can be done, right? So regarding the soft power, yes, I sort of redefined it here in this book because, yes, they're using their influence in a different way, which is by winning friends, by saying, let's come up with a win-win deal. Instead of the traditional colonial way of getting natural resources, which is just to go in there and plunder it and enslave the population or whatever. They basically treat all these nations as equals, and as a way they develop that friendship, and that becomes their soft power, their brand of soft power. And yeah, I think that they want to develop more entertainment and become more influential that way, but what they've already done so far is actually very powerful and worth emulating. Yes?
Hi, and thanks for your talk. Very quick comment is that, in my mind, a lot of this is about demographics and how China gets played up and demonized. That has to do with demographics. My question to you is, how would you characterize U.S.-China relationship, and what, in your mind, would it take for that to get better?
I think that the way to improve the relationship would be no different than what the US did with Britain, right? Because these two countries were mortal enemies at one point. The whole American Revolution was fought between these two countries. And now Britain is America's closest ally. And a friend of mine, Charles Kupchan, wrote a book called How Enemies Become Friends. And he basically said that it really takes the top leaders to come to the understanding and both have the desire to become friends, and that will happen. I get asked all the time now by media commentators saying, Anne, what do you think is going to happen out of this meeting with Tim Geithner in China? You think that China's going to give concessions about Iran and all these other areas? And my response is, don't expect anything if you treat them hostilely. You have to first develop a friendship, and then anything is possible, right? So it's really about extending the olive branch, and that's really the answer.
Yes. Ever since 2008, the Beijing Olympics, there are a lot of visionary columnists or journalists are calling the Americans to look at China's system. And your book is sort of like concrete the idea, give out specific advices. But my question is, do you think the decision makers are listening, or do they want to listen?
I don't know what they do at home or. No, I hope that they'll pick up a copy. But I do say in my introduction that oftentimes change has to come from the grassroots, right? The people who already have power, the establishment, aren't motivated to make changes because they're enjoying plenty of benefits with the status quo. So generally, changes come from people who are not satisfied with the situation and organized to make positive change happen. And we've seen evidence of that throughout the world, like this past year, right? So, and so I basically believe that the same thing will happen. The positive changes like ending slavery and giving women the right to vote took years. And making the changes that I talk about, I'm sure will take just as long. And, yeah, you.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned about special economic zones such as Guangdong, Shenzhen, and Fujian in China, and you suggested that the model could be applied in the U.S. by the federal government. How would you reconcile that with the idea of federalism, which is built into the U.S. Constitution, which aims at providing near to equality to the 50 states? If the federal government prefers one state over the other, I think you would be running counter to the constitutionality of what the government wants to do.
No, I agree that there could be some constitutional issues with some of these things, which is why I said that the government would have to work very carefully and closely with the states to make sure that things don't get violated, or that they try to make adjustments so that people feel comfortable with doing something like this. So I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I'm sure that if this is an idea that is worth exploring, that they'll put the right minds to it to come up with appropriate solutions to make something happen, right? Because the Constitution is a living document, and it should fit with the times. And so if something doesn't work anymore, then, you know, people need to figure out how to make it work for them. Okay, hello, yeah.
My question starts with a comment about Michael Porter actually supported what you said about having a plan last election cycle. He said the United States has no strategic plan. And he was trying to get, this was when the crisis started, for the politicians to create plans going forward. One of the problems that I see is in innovation. In a command economy, it's harder to innovate. With the United States, the situation in a position where they need more innovation. So my question really is, what did you see in China in the 5-year plans, how they stimulated innovation, possibly in green energy, and how did they do that?
Well, they have created a lot of technology incubators around the country, where they basically make it super easy for someone to come up with new inventions, because they will house them, they provide supermarkets within walking distance for them, they basically take care of all their basic expenses and just say, here is your office, your lab, whatever you need, and just do whatever you need to do to make, you know, something work out. And so, of course, they have different cycles of when, you know, how much money they get, so they have to prove, you know, there's the proof of their proof of concept and so forth. And so they basically actively encourage innovation by making it possible for these entrepreneurs to pursue their dreams. Today, it's very hard for US entrepreneurs to do that because it's hard to make a living. How can, you know, a lot of these innovations take years of tinkering, of, you know, working out all the kinks. And if you've got, you know, an annual inflation of, you know, 3% or 5% or whatever it is, how are they going to sustain themselves, right? They need to have some kind of support. And even though we have a venture capital system that has helped on that front, but they're also profit-making entities, right? And so they tend to, right now, what I see is that they invest in lots of social media, which is a much quicker hit. That tends to be less innovative from the engineering side and more just, you know, dealing with applications that already exist and doing that. So it's not sort of the true disruptive innovation that we really need. To do that, we really need to have areas where people can work on it at their pace without the pressures of making a daily living. Any more questions?
One final question. Other than making comments through Amazon Books, with respect to your book, is there a specific website you have created in allowing people in putting forth ideas or comments on your book?
Probably, well, I have a website called professorannlee.com. So you can email me there if you just want to give me your personal comments, but if you want the whole world to see it, maybe you can tweet about it on Twitter or you know, put it up an article on Huffington Post. So, yeah, so, I don't know. One last question.
Okay, another question, just suggestion. So
Oh, okay.
Not the last. I think, you know, in your book, maybe in the future expansion, I think you touch all the structure, and it's a subtle part, it's not touched, it's the culture, like the gentleman over there.
The what?
The subtle part, the culture, and the education, and attitude.
Culture, oh.
Culture, sorry.
Yeah.
And I think this is really the difference between the US and the China. For example, right, another gentleman talked about the soft power and of Chinese. For example, we talk about Africa. For example, I'm in some of the petroleum business. For example, there's a land over there, the western over there, the occupied place, they dig oil every day, right? They become millionaire, and the people still as poor as before after 30 years. Now the Chinese businessmen, you know, I don't know if they are really friendly or they are more intelligent. They go there and say, oh, we can make billions of dollars here. Why don't you get some education here? We get some books for you. We build a small road for you. They take care of the chief and they make a brand. Now they do the business. You know what? They run away the Western. They give business to the Chinese. So I think the overall, the whole thing, like the biggest thing is not the system, not the 3, 4 years or 5 years. They have the plan, you know, the economic plan. I think the attitude of, I think the softer part, intangible part is really the culture, the attitude, the way of thinking, and the way to deal with people. That's the
Well, I talk about that in that opening chapter on Confucianism.
Okay. I need a book.
Basically, yeah, get my book. All right, well, thank you, everyone.